welcome back to my channel. So last time I wanted to cover a subject that for me seemed very pertinent. I grew up in a very strict, conservative, traditional, religious structure. So for me, the idea of masculinity was very particular. Now that I am away from that structure and I am a gay man, I wanted to see what that was exactly. What is masculinity within the context of the LGBT community? But I only looked at masculinity as a structure. I wasn't going into the particulars about what exactly that was. Of course, nowadays, whenever we're talking about masculinity, we always have to talk about the evil, pernicious, toxic masculinity, because we live in a patriarchal society that suppresses women. So naturally, in my last video, I covered a little bit of toxic masculinity. If you'd like to watch that video, I'll leave the link on one of these sides. And I want to learn more. So I scoured YouTube. Actually, I just put in, what is toxic masculinity? And then this video popped up from theadvocate.com, which is the world's leading LGBTQ news source since 1967. So they must have some authority on these subjects. It's getting a little hot in here.
With all these men getting fired and accused of sexual harassment, the phrase toxic masculinity is in the air, in everything from sexual assault to mass shootings. But what is toxic masculinity? Masculinity refers to performed behaviors that have been attributed to manhood. Toxic refers to a subset of violent, destructive, or oppressive behaviors performed in an attempt to live up to a mythological idea of masculinity.
Wow, 25 seconds in and we were hit with a lot of information. She says it's a list of performed behaviors that have been attributed to manhood. So you can take that either in the aspect of it's something biological, because if it's performed, it's coming from the person. We act upon how we are. But I think what they want to talk about and their conception of these ideas of masculinity, femininity, is that they're all socially constructed, that there's no biological foundation under that, and they could just easily change and fix all of the problems that they see. And that's masculinity. It's attributed to manhood. And then with the toxic part, that they are behaviors that are violent, destructive, oppressive, that come from a certain ideal of masculinity from the past. I hope that at some point they talk about what the good behaviors are that are attributed to manhood, and not just focus on the toxic ones.
We're not saying that men are toxic, but their behavior can be.
All right, so now we're making a distinction. Men aren't toxic, but behaviors are toxic, possibly toxic. So that's a really important distinction, to separate one's actions from one's person.
One reason this exists is because we have a problem with the cultural definition of what a real man is. Manhood is framed in opposition to womanhood. So a toxic view of masculinity sees anything feminine as a threat to masculinity.
So now we're adding the idea of real man. So that must be what that mythical ideal of masculinity which causes the toxic behaviors. I think that's what they're trying to say. And when they use the word opposition, masculinity is set up in opposition to femininity. Opposition doesn't mean against in the sense of like versus. It's more a distinction. Like when we say black and white, that doesn't mean that black is set up against white or white is set up against black. It's just we're making a simple distinction. But I think later on, she's going to make the point that it is something that is masculine versus feminine.
Boys are taught at a young age to be aggressive, competitive, and strong at all costs. We see this played out whenever a boy is bullied for being weak because they were crying or expressing emotion. So toxically masculine behavior occurs when men feel they need to defend or assert this unhealthy idea of masculinity. This can mean doubling down on toxic behavior, such as denial of feelings, verbal abuse, and physical or sexual violence.
Are you crazy? Don't talk about my mother!
Oh, she just said that the behavior that's impressed upon boys to assert and defend their masculinity. And then there's this clip where the one boy is punching the other one saying, "Don't talk about my mother that way." It doesn't seem like the boy is asserting his masculinity to defend masculinity. It seems like he's trying to defend his mother against a bully. I personally am not very confrontational by nature, at least not physically. And when I was younger, I was a lot more sensitive, and I did do sports, but I just wasn't one of the guys. I remember that I was bullied, not by all the other boys who maybe would have been seen as more masculine as me, but by the bully, the asshole. He attacked me for whatever reason that was in his life, whether he felt insecure and he needed to dominate, maybe he came from a broken family, but he bullied me. It wasn't because I was sensitive, and instead of fighting back physically, I went to my parents, I went to the teachers, I tried to use the socially acceptable means of confronting this bully, which did have an effect. But I wouldn't blame somebody who is being physically attacked by someone to defend themselves, not defend their masculinity. I don't think there's anyone out there, any father or male figure in bullies' lives, who say that they want to create little monsters. In fact, usually the bully's parents have no idea that their child is a bully. So, come on. Bullies are bullies.
In our patriarchal society, masculinity is valued over femininity. Masculine presenting people are encouraged to show domination over women and feminine presenting people. This can be displayed in the form of sexual objectification, possessiveness, and predatory behavior.
I would love to see exactly where that type of behavior is promoted and encouraged. But besides that, I want to talk about the LGBT community. I would say that these ideas of sexual objectification, possessiveness, and predatory behavior are very common within the gay community. Listen, the whole point of union amongst the members of the gay community is their attraction. It's something dealing with sex. Their whole lives are obsessed with sex and expressing themselves, which is in the act of sex. And because they threw out any sort of structure or guidelines to help them know what is the proper behavior, you will see all excesses. You'll see extreme sexual objectification. Looking at apps like Grindr, where people don't look at faces, they look at torsos, and they go after the body in order to fill some sexual gratification. It doesn't matter who the other person is. It's like masturbating, but with another body. And possessiveness, jealousy, it's so common within the gay community for people to cheat on other people. I have friends who broke up with many partners because of that. People don't trust the other one, and they're afraid if they see their partner looking at another guy. Or you can never go to these places, you can never talk to these people, because why? I'm afraid that you're gonna give in to your sexual gratification. Surprise, surprise. And then if you're only looking at the other person as an object, you will find a lot of sexual predators out there. Everything is about sex. And although we can agree that there are many elements of previous times that are not acceptable, there was a little thing that men were taught, boys were taught, and that was respect women. Within the gay community, Do they have that?
There's also a dangerous sense of entitlement that comes from the narrative saying that the more masculine you are, the more entitled you are to respect, power, a job, and sex. When women disagree or say no, aggression, anger, or violence can follow because they're denied what is owed to this masculine sense of power.
There's a place out there for men who remain hard even though the person that they're with says no repeatedly.
This toxic sense of entitlement contributes to the rampant rape culture in this country.
Ah yes, the RRC, rampant rape culture. Is that all that she's gonna say? But she's not gonna give any statistics, any sort of proof of that. She's just gonna throw it out there. I have my doubts that there is even a thing called rape culture. I've heard it many times, but
toxic masculinity can also lead to homophobia because the attraction to men is considered feminine and therefore a threat to straight masculinity.
when I left my past, I had an opportunity to just leave everything, everyone behind me. Like friends, family, whatever. My family is not very accepting of my decision or my current lifestyle, which is a whole other issue. But I don't just cut off every tie with them. Why? Because I was in that position and I understand where they're coming from. And for a lot of these people that have homophobia, I understand why they have that. They're from a certain way of thinking, a certain structure where a man is attracted to a woman and a woman is attracted to a man. Whether that's a good thing or not is a whole other subject. So when they hear about these deviants, I understand where the confusion and that type of reaction comes from. Again, I don't think it's the right reaction, but come on. You can't just expect everyone to have your own perspective and just be accepting of everything you do. People are very complicated and they come from very unique situations. And I would say that the men in my life that I respected for being real men, they wouldn't feel threatened when they come across homosexuality. They wouldn't think that their own masculinity is being tested in any way. I remember a friend of the family, I was so nervous about wearing pink because of my strict background and maybe because I was trying to hide my homosexuality. And he told me, real men wear pink.
Lesbians and bisexual women can also be victims of toxic outlash for denying men their entitlement to women's bodies and attention.
I know that those men must exist. Maybe they were really attracted to one woman that, I don't know, they wanted to be with, and then they found out she was a lesbian and they got upset. But I can't think of a man who was outraged because they couldn't sleep with a lesbian, that they were entitled to that woman. I mean, this is if a man thought that they had an entitlement over any woman just for the fact of being a man. That man is an asshole, and he can have the room next to the other guy in the...
Toxic masculinity can also appear within the LGBT community. Shorthand like mask for mask or no femmes can be exclusionary to more feminine presenting gay men. It's okay to be attracted to certain people, but don't devalue others in the process.
Where is this type of language found again? Oh yeah, Grindr, the hookup site. If we're gonna talk about devaluing people, maybe we shouldn't be looking at the hookup site where the main focus is sexual gratification and objectifying the other person just to get your kicks off.
First, learn more about toxic masculinity, how it appears in our culture and in ourselves. Second, define your own masculinity. You get to decide what masculinity means to you.
I was hoping to get some sort of definition, some sort of goal of what masculinity is, what good masculinity is. But in the end, it's whatever you want it to be, just as long as it's not toxic. In general, on a personal level, I have never been attracted to feminine men. Of course, it's okay for someone to act more feminine more masculine, have some sort of mix in between. That's fine. That's someone's individuality. It's almost like with personalities. Everyone has their own specific type of personality. Of course, like with personality, we can take a step back and look at this person is extroverted or this person is introverted. And if we look at all of the extroverted people, they're extroverted in various degrees. The same can be said with masculinity and femininity. Someone can be more caring, more nurturing, and the other one can be more dominant and more aggressive, not in a violent way. I think another important distinction not to forget is that there's a big difference between a man who is in control of himself and his body and his emotions and his mind, who is able to function within society as a man, and one who walks around animalistic and totally repressed emotionally, who has a problem. Those are two different types of men.
It doesn't have to be in opposition to femininity. It can be in cooperation with it. Masculinity does not have to come at the expense of your own emotions, and it does not need to be defended with violence. Listen to survivors' stories and believe them.
If the cases are verified, I will believe them.
Practice things like affirmative sexual consent, as well as listening to and affirming your own emotions.
Anyone who cannot pick up on certain social cues and understand what consent is can have another room in the...
We'll never be perfect, but we can learn to be better every day.
I have a better way to end this video. Instead of just pointing out behaviors and calling them toxic that most men would consider to be the worst of society and that are in no way taught to a scale in order to label it as some sort of cultural movement, why don't we give a true and wholesome idea of masculinity so that men can understand how they should live, give them guidelines to make them better people and better members of society and better partners. And especially within the LGBT community, not making sex the only goal in life, because I'll tell you, it will lead to emptiness and unhappiness. It's like a black hole that no matter how many partners and sexual experiences, new innovative ways of doing it, no matter how many times, it will never fill up. In its very nature, it's just a moment and it just passes. But if it's in the context of a real union between two people that give themselves to each other, then it's put into its proper place and it gives it something that means more than just the action alone. Maybe then we wouldn't see so many cases of sexual deviancy, and then we could really point out the assholes and put a collar and a leash on them because they're nothing more than animals. So I think that's all for today. I have a lot to think about and I hope that I gave you some food for thought. Please leave your comments down below, like the video, subscribe to my channel, tell people about it, and also because this is a one-man show, I appreciate your support financially as well if it's possible. I know it's a difficult time for everyone. If you want, you can check out a page that I made specifically to receive donations. It's called Ko-fi. On there, if you are able to give a donation, I have special content, kind of like an incentive of different pages from my book that I'm editing, and you can kind of get a sneak peek on what I plan on publishing in the future. Thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you on the next video. Have a wonderful day. Bye.